Welcome to The Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Bankard, and I'm here with all the lonely people. They are no strangers to me, though. This is my lame joke on this movie. First, he'll keep the vampires from your door. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
So I went to look up quotes from this movie to respond to you at this point, and every quote I was thinking of doing almost made me cry, and I was like, I don't think that I can actually deliver it. So that's my setup for how I'm going to feel about this movie.
Okay.
And I'll just say, hello, Jen. I'm doing well. How are you?
Hello. No tears. And he doesn't get to decide when it ends, and I'm sure he wishes this podcast were shorter. It's Antonio Elefano. How's it feel to be finally reviewing this film, Antonio? I know you've been asking to do it for a long time.
I know I have. Maybe I didn't hold you all those lonely, lonely times. And I guess I never told you I am so happy that you're mine. If I made you feel second best, I'm so sorry I was blind. You were always on my mind. You were always on my mind. I had the same problem as PT. I looked up the quotes. They all made me cry. This one almost made me cry too. But I actually put it on I listened to it on iTunes for a while.
Okay.
And it just and it's a very upbeat, fun song. But after watching this movie, it's different.
Never the same.
So you desensitized yourself to the lyrics a little bit.
I did.
It's like a very...
I'm doing great. And thank you so much. I'm so happy to do this finally.
Amazing. So we are here today. Curious to know what subset of our listeners understood any of that. We are here today to review Andrew Haigh's romantic fantasy, All of Us Strangers, which actually just left theaters. And it is, conveniently for you listening to this episode, it is slated to stream on Hulu this time next week on February 22nd. So we're recording this on Thursday, February 15th. By next weekend, you will be able to watch this movie on Hulu. It tells the story of Adam, a screenwriter who lives alone in London and has to confront the loss of his parents, along with the prospect of starting a new relationship. Now, let me tell you, writing that was hard to do so without spoilers. So I'm pretty proud of myself for that one. This movie sadly got left completely out of the Oscars. Don't worry, there's going to be plenty of lamenting about that today. But it does have 6 nominations at the British Oscars, otherwise known as the BAFTAs, which are this weekend, in fact. So this haunting film with a strong ensemble cast was named in the top 10 independent films by the National Board of Review. And of course, it received a Long Take Review award from us for Andrew Scott for Best Actor. Which that's the only thing that matters, is that we recognize this movie, right? So yeah, I just wanted to take the chance to read all those accolades, because you're not going to hear about this in the Oscars conversation in the next couple weeks, but that's no fault of this film. So if you're listening to us for the first time, if you're like, I have no idea what this movie is, and should I be still listening to this podcast, we will have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not seen the film yet. And it's basically so you can decide whether or not you want to check it out. We will issue a very clear spoiler alert when we shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. PT, if listeners don't want to be strangers to us after they hear this episode, what can they do?
If they want us to always be on their mind, people should follow us wherever they get their podcasts. Look for the Long Take Review in your podcast feed. They can also subscribe on Substack, which is where it is hosted. Jen's Substack, thelongtake.substack.com. But you can find us in all the other usual places: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, etc. They can also check us out on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review to get more social-based updates about the show.
Amazing. Thanks, PT. So we are just about ready to get into talking about All of Us Strangers. But first, we do have a couple of items for a movie news update.
Just in off the wire, it's your Hollywood news.
It's been too long since I've heard that.
It really has been, and when Greg's not here, it's even better.
It is, because it's like he's here now. Or shaking his fist that I ever turn that into our movie news bumper. All right, so, Oscars. I was looking at our calendar to sort of schedule our future episodes and panicked because the Oscars are actually quite soon. They're only in a few weeks. And so, the campaigning is really hot and heavy right now. And so my first item of news I wanted to talk about was the Academy Luncheon, which is basically this big lunch that they have with anyone who has been nominated this year for an Oscar. And they take this like massive and awkward looking class photo. Have either of you seen this online?
Yeah.
It's like, because they do call it a class photo because it literally is like them on risers standing awkwardly next to each other and like in this
Yeah.
huge photo.
The best is when, like, I saw one photo where it's, while they're assembling, and so the people like on the far right of the photo, stage left, have to like stand there for an extra like 20 minutes or so while everyone else, filters in, gets in position, and gets lined up properly. So yeah, it seems like a real ordeal for them.
What's fascinating is that they're not grouped in a way that's sort of like by like category or anything. Like I always look at them just like, where's the famous people? Right? Like there's always like particular people that I'm sort of looking for. And they're always like scattered about. Like it makes sense like Lily Gladstone's next to like Martin Scorsese, but then like Divine Joy Randolph is like right next to Martin Scorsese. And like, oh, that's an interesting conversation. And like Sandra Huller is all the way on the far left, so I was wondering why she's all the way there. Annette Bening's up there with Cillian Murphy at the top. So it's Jodie Foster not the thing. For some reason, that's the person I was looking for. but yeah,
Oh, was she not? Was
no,
she not there at all?
she was not there.
Okay,
There were a few people who weren't there, but she was one of the notable ones who wasn't there. Yeah,
You were looking
interesting.
for Jodie Foster because you couldn't look for Andrew Scott, who was who you really wanted
that's
to
right.
find in that
That's right.
photo.
Oh,
Yeah.
bummer.
But yeah, I will note, and I'm totally stealing this because Jen put this in the doc, but I'll take it. That the real winner of the whole event was Messi, the dog who played Snoop in Anatomy of a Fall, who was the star. Everyone coming up, wanting to spend time with Messi. Red carpet photos. And I'm not trying to belabor. We're really try to like work overtime to make a transition happen, but I feel like it makes it seem like there should be a new category for best animal, best pet, best animal actor at the Oscars. But Jen, do they ever have new categories?
They do. Wow, amazing! I can't blow it now. Yes, in fact, PT. The other piece of news that we actually could have talked about on our last episode, but there was too much going on, so we sort of neglected to address it. The Academy came out with a best casting category, which will go into effect, I believe, in 2025. So that means it's the 2026 Oscars that will be including this in the. Well, there's a debate actually whether or not it will be in the broadcast, or if it is in the broadcast, what will get kicked out, because apparently they signed some sort of contract where like they can't make the show longer, or they're not allowed to add more categories to the actual broadcast.
Oh, interesting.
On I think it was Vanity Fair as podcast logo men. So that could be interesting, is like this is a shakeup. But the main story that I heard was that this has been a long time coming. I believe the head of the Academy is from the casting branch and is on his way out, and so this is his like, I gotta get this done before I get out of here. But apparently, all casting directors ever very happy. Oscar pundits very verklempt. Because they're like, well, is this going to be like best ensemble at SAG? And therefore, like a best picture kind of indicator? Is this going to be basically best picture? Is this just going to be awarding the biggest movies with the biggest ensemble casts? Like what? Everyone's like running around with their heads off, being like, what is going on? It's very funny. But what do you think? Like, what do you think? What type of, like, what is this category going to end up being, do you think?
It feels to me like it would be a mistake to let it just be another best picture category of like the 5 nominees will be the 5 top contenders in best picture, because it's like, we love all these actors. I think it would be more interesting if it, were oh, you really like precisely chose, like, instead of, obviously like Oppenheimer feels like, whoa, look at all those people they got. But it's also kind of like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, big movie, a lot of money, famous director. Like, I would be much more interested in seeing an award for the casting of the Holdovers, which is
Yeah.
just, three main characters, but like one of them was like found, at the filming location, and then All of Us Strangers, which we'll be talking about, has a very small cast, but like everyone is, really good in it. So I feel like that would be good. I also kind of assume there's going to be some casting director version of Diane Warren who's just like, everyone loves this person, and like we'll get nominated every year, and it'll be like, some random movie no one's heard of that was like dumped on Hulu one day, but it gets an Oscar nomination because it's like, Judy did it. Like, we love Judy. Like, let's vote for Judy again. So we'll find out. And the magic is in not knowing. And I feel like part of the being verklempt is the people who like to think they know everything can't know what this is. So
yeah, and there's excitement too. Like, it's somewhat a good, a nervous but happy energy, from all the major Oscar pundits. Antonio, what would you want to see in this category? Like, what's your
I mean,
dream for
I'm
this?
gonna. I agree with PT. I had a conversation with Jim Clements about the holdovers and how his thing about the holdovers was that so much of the cast looked like real people, um, and but it's not that they look like real people. Like they embodied those characters really well. There are three central characters, but there are other characters at the beginning of the film, obviously, who fit those roles really well. So to me, like if we're rewarding casting as an art and not, it's not best cast, right? It's best casting.
Yeah.
Um, then I think then that's the kind of thing that I think should be rewarded, as opposed to just like having the budget to pay like um 20 or 15 of like the biggest stars in Hollywood, right? To have Rami Malek in like basically a cameo role, right? Like I think that shouldn't be what this is
Hey, holding
for.
that clipboard was a lot of work. Okay.
he dropped that
Um,
pen impeccably.
How
he
about you,
did.
Jen?
He
What,
did.
what what do you think this year would be your vote for best casting if you
Oh,
could
that's a good
cast a vote?
question. Well, so my mind immediately goes to Killers of the Flower Moon
Oh
because
yeah,
they
yeah.
did such an amazing job casting all those indigenous actors and, people that were actually who were descendants. Some of them are descendants of those who were actually affected by the real life historical events of the movie. So that's kind of where my mind first goes to as kind of an
Yeah.
achievement in casting. But then I feel like I would want this category to be a mix of like something like that. But then also I think of like Teo Yu, who like I had never seen in anything before, who just like is so perfect for that part. Like, what I mean? I would want it to be a mix of like, oh, like you made this whole movie happen by putting all these actors together, but then also have some nominees that are more reflective of like single instances of casting that are really
Sure.
good. I don't know. Yeah, I'm trying to think now.
So this
What do
category
you
would be
think
the
of?
kind of thing where only casting directors would choose the nominees, right? Only
I think
people
so.
in like
So there was a question about that because the big narrative about Oppenheimer is that Christopher Nolan just cast Cillian Murphy like off the top
yeah.
rope because because he just knew him and was like, "Can you do this role?" Like there was a phone call between the two of them and then it was done. So it's like, does that just not count? Like, would that not have been eligible for this? That's a good question. I think the answer is yes, because it sounds like this is an effort put forth by the casting directors branch. And so I think what's going to happen, and I heard this discussed on, I want to say it was Awards Watch, but it was one of the podcasts in my regular rotation of like, maybe this means we hear more narratives and more campaigning on behalf of casting directors, where like suddenly we learn like what casting directors actually do and like which ones were responsible for which actors and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's just that distinction between who's doing what is just going to become more prominent because there's a separate category now. So that'll be really interesting to see. I'll be interested to learn more about what's involved in casting. Also, May December. That's probably another
Oh,
good
I
category,
agree. Yeah.
Great call.
right? Like,
I have a feeling that even if Cillian Murphy and even if it were Cillian Murphy, Matt Damon, Robert Downey Jr. were all cast, and Emily Blunt maybe, we're all like, Christopher Nolan was like, this is who I wrote it for, like, call them. that the casting directors would probably say, oh, but it's like that person who has one line in the background of one scene, like nailing that person is as much a part of the job as getting a famous star person to be in the
Yeah, I
famous
like that.
star person role. So I have a feeling Oppenheimer would probably still get nominated this year because they would want to, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised, I guess. I don't think they would like disqualify it because a director chose things. I also wonder if there's a degree to which, like what you were saying, Jen, about, oh, we're going to hear more about it, if there's going to be times sort of like Bohemian Rhapsody winning for editing after the tensions with Bryan Singer, where it's like, yeah, they got a really good cast despite the filmmakers and despite the like studio interference, that like there will be some inside baseball component to who gets actually nominated, who gets attention within the field.
That will
That
just
might lead
confuse
to
the rest of
some,
us.
yeah, but might lead to some interesting tidbits.
That's true. That's true. I like it. I like it. So yeah, excited to see where this goes. I know, Greg's not here. Was he the one, or I don't remember who it was. One of the four of us was like, "Oh, what about stunts?" So I just wanted to shout that out. That like, we're happy about this, but then okay, what's next? Like let's get the other categories that we've been asking for a long time.
Yeah,
In
stunts
here.
or choreography, if you want to have it be both action choreography and
That's right.
dance musical choreography,
Right.
and then voice act. I think Greg was talking about voice acting. That's what he came up with in the thread.
Yeah. There's lots of possibilities. Lots of people in the industry who are just not recognized at all by the Oscars, which seems like a raw deal. The last thing I'll say, just to kind of put like a want note on this, is that the BAFTAs, which we're going to talk about at the end of the show, probably are going to have or have had a casting category for some time now. They once gave Joker this best casting, so I'll just leave that there. This is just additional information for everyone. All right, so I think we are ready to get into. I know Antonio's been waiting long enough. We'll get into our short takes of All of Us Strangers. I want to keep this pretty short, this and recommendation algorithm, because I just, as soon as I started trying to write anything about this film, I was just like, spoilers. Oh no, left, right, dodging everywhere. So we probably are going to like just try to keep these fairly brief. So make this a short take. But what were your general impressions of the film? We'll start with Antonio, since this was this actually your favorite movie of the year?
No, it's not my favorite movie. I mean, I think, it wasn't on my radar until actually you, Jen, mentioned wanting to see it, that it was really high on your list. It was ironic that you were the last
I know.
of us. Well, it's just because it came to your area like last, but it wasn't on my radar. But then I was like, Jen wants to see it. I'm gonna go see it, and it was just stunning. I thought I'd like it anyway based on Andrew Haigh. He did a show called Looking on HBO, which I enjoyed, which I thought was very good. And then the cast: Andrew Scott, Paul Mescal, Claire Foy, and Jamie Bell. I love all of those actors. And I just thought it was just staggeringly beautiful on so many levels, and just a really rich movie experience that I will not soon forget. And I think you'd have to be dead inside not to be moved by this. Uh, PT, what are your thoughts?
I kind of wanted to say I'm dead inside, but no, I was very moved by it. I already said.
We're just gonna insert you crying for like 5 minutes straight, and then
just sobs. I already said I couldn't really. I pulled a few quotes, and then I was like, I don't. All these are just sad. But no, it was sad in a good way. I thought this was very moving, and I feel like it was a movie that really was walking a high wire act. There's lots of ways in which it could have gone wrong. And we will discuss probably once we get into the spoiler territory, that what I've said to both of you off mic, that there were a couple times where I was like, I may not like this. Like, I may not like what this is doing. But it always proved me wrong. It always sort of was making the right choices, and came together in just this, just waves of emotion in something that I think could have been cloying and manipulative, or feel cloying and manipulative, but it didn't. And I think that it's a real credit to both the telling of the story, the writing and directing of it, but also these core four performances, all of which are incredible and really, even if you what we're saying is like, I don't think I want to watch a movie that's really sad. That sounds awful. That like it's worth it for the acting. It's worth to see the craft of what these actors do. Jen, how about you?
Yeah, there's not much more for me to add. I definitely agree with both of you. It's absolutely beautiful, devastatingly sad, just like gut punch, soul crushing, like any like insert standard extreme adjective in here. Um, but for me, what really makes it memorable is it takes things we think we've already seen, a family drama and a relationship drama, and tells them in a completely unexpected way. At least for me, like I was because
Yeah.
and I that's why I would say like if you have not seen this movie, go into it knowing as little about it as possible. Like I know that's hypocritical because we're asking you to listen to our podcast about it right now in theory, but like right after we're done with this part, right, just go watch it. I would say if you haven't seen it yet, because like the less you know about it the better, and I think a lot of the thrill of watching it in addition to the emotional impact is kind of the it's not twisty in like a thriller sense at all. It's just unexpected. It's kind of the best word I think I can use. So
Yeah.
and the acting is amazing, and it's something that if you had written the spoiler version of the movie's plot premise and shown it to me, I would have been like, that's ridiculous, that's not gonna work. Like this sounds absurd, but it's just so well done, and it's so believable, and like just really really drew me in. I will have to say though that I did not all out cry during this, not because my heart is made of stone, but because I procrastinated seeing this movie, and it was like one of those things where it was now or never. It was the last day it was going to be in theaters near me, and it was a 10 o'clock screening, and I was by myself in the theater. And then in the last act, some random dude came in and was just like shuffling around. Like he didn't just like and I was just like, wait, why are you coming in now? Like this doesn't make any sense. And like so then I got really nervous and scared and like panicked, and was like two I had to split my attention between making sure like nothing weird was happening, and because he kept getting up and moving to different seats, like it was a very weird situation. And just making a lot of noise, and just like so yeah, I couldn't be as emotionally vulnerable as I think I would have had I been even just like watching this at home probably, or just watching this during the day with other people in the room. You know what I mean? Like so it's a very unusual circumstance, but otherwise like so I had to appreciate this more on an intellectual than like a raw and emotional one, I think. But yeah, sorry to but I feel
I'm,
like
I'm,
that has to color my review in some
I mean,
way.
I'm mad that this guy interfered.
Yeah.
I'm mad
Yeah.
that he took it away from you.
Yeah.
But
Um
talk about spoiler mode. This
and
guy.
then I know, right? And then I kept wondering like why he was there, and I was like, does he just not want to go home? And like this is one of the last movies that's playing right now in this theater. I don't know. Like it was it was just so weird. I've never had experience like that. There's a big
He
difference
was
between going to a movie at 9 o'clock at that versus 10 o'clock, because I do the former fairly often, and I've not had this problem. So
he was trying to figure out how to process Lisa Frankenstein and was like, "Well, this looks like a place I can do that."
right. Or he had just gotten out of Argyle. It was like, I
Oh,
need something to bring me down to earth. No,
I need
who
to
knows?
pick me up.
Right, right. Okay. All right. So, you know, I think we're ready to do a quick recommendation algorithm. We've all given kind of a general endorsement of this film, but I want to get more specific about like who should, in particular, would really like this movie. So, the recommendation algorithm in which we establish the audience of a film. So, again, trying not to get into spoilers, I feel like the genre or genres this movie inhabits are somewhat unusual. And so like I had a hard time thinking of like a reference point of like, oh, people who like this type of movie should go watch this. But so help me out here. Like who should be seeing this movie? What kind of reference points can we set up for them?
This is a hard one. I was when I was thinking back to sort of like what kind of movies I'd well, I started with qualities of the film, and one thing is that it's talky and pretty theatrical. It has a very small cast, and it's so that reminded me of last year, Women Talking, which was also talky and very theatrical.
Hmm.
So people who just like love like excellent dialogue, excellent character work, and enjoys like just like an acting showcase. I think this would be good for them. And then the other thing that I thought of was like a sustained sort of mood piece like Lost in Translation, which is also kind of a relationship
Mm.
drama too. Um, so those were the two. Those are my additions to the algorithm. How about you all?
I don't know. I'm remembering going. Jen, it was at your birthday party. We were all standing around in a circle talking, and I had just seen Past Lives, and you had both seen it like a few weeks earlier. And we kept telling people to go see it. I was like, it's small and it's quiet. And I think Antonio was like, that's not selling it. That's not like, it doesn't sound positive to people to lead with that. But I don't know. I like those qualities in a movie like this, and I think this is another one that's very like it is just sort of the lives of these people and their interactions, and again, it's there's just four main characters, and that's pretty much all you see in the movie. Like there's some background people and transit moments, but for the most part, we're just sort of following four people interacting,
Hmm.
and like Antonio said, it does feel very stagey in a good way. Like it feels like, oh, this could be a play. Like you can kind of see like lights down on this set, lights up on
Hmm.
this set, and the conversation is happening over there now. And I think that is something that people can be hungry for, whether it's just like, oh yeah, like an actual like human drama and people interacting. And again, kind of repeating myself, I think that it's just, if you want to watch actors just doing great work and being really kind of raw and open and honest with each other in a way that I think people lament, of like, I don't make movies that do this anymore, everything's corporate, cookie cutter, blah blah blah, that like this doesn't feel like that at all. And I think that people who are hungry for that and missing that, I think could connect with this movie.
In particular, Andrew Scott, because in terms of like actors that might draw people to this movie, because you've never seen him like this. I'm pretty sure, like, because most people know him from Fleabag, right, and from Sherlock, which he's wonderful in both of those. But they're just such different roles that you're just not going to see this performance coming at all.
And it's so funny
um,
because you see flashes of the Andrew Scott, like pretty like regularly, where you're just like, yeah, right, it's Andrew Scott. Like he's doing some Andrew Scott things. And then like, but he has this like, obviously he's a good actor and is playing a character, and that character is very present and is very different from what you're used to. So it almost makes the sort of other parts that come in hit harder, because you start to like let down your guard, because you're like, oh yeah, it's Hot Priest, this is fine. And then it's like,
I know
oh
what this
God,
is. Oh,
no.
I like all of those comps. The mention of Lost in Translation, Antonio, makes me think of Drive My Car.
Oh yeah,
Because
Yes.
I feel like and especially PT, you mentioned the transportation scenes, like the repetition of like being on the tube, being on the train, like
yeah.
going somewhere over and over again. Like that actually is very Drive My Car in terms of, and then in terms of the quiet and the kind of lot people staring out windows. Like this is a people staring out windows movie, for sure, in a good way, in a way that's like will
Good
be
way.
moving. I think I think that's good. Are we ready to go spoiler mode? I'm
I think
dying
we
to go
have
into
to.
spoiler mode. Yeah, we
It's
Yeah.
hard to hold back.
Yes. So we are about to go into spoiler mode. If you have not seen All of Us Strangers and you do not want it spoiled, and trust me, there's a lot of big spoilers to be had for this one in particular. We've been really good. We've been really dancing around some major things that are just a basic part of this movie. So we are going to discuss the plot in a lot more detail and spoil everything. So if this is your time to exit, watch the movie. It's going to be on Hulu really soon, and then come back and rejoin us for the rest of the conversation. Okay, so I think I'm gonna start. Usually, I start with like the biggest spoiler possible because that's fun. But I actually am gonna start with the take that I've heard so far about this movie that I disagree with the most. And that is Sean Fennessy on The Big Picture, one of my favorite movie podcasts. And, Sean Fennessy is generally a critic that I listen to and respect a lot, though I don't always agree with him. And this is one of those cases. He said that he interprets everything that happens in this film, especially because of the ending, which we're going to get to in a second, I think, as a part, as taking place in the life of the mind, was the phrase that he used. And that to me implied that he thought that it was none of it was supposed to be real, that it was all sort of like a dream of the Adam character played by Andrew Scott, and kind of like his imagination, because he's a writer and he's trying to think of stories for his. So what do you think about that? I don't agree with that, but I want to hear what you think first. Like, what is real in this movie, and what is just a dream?
I think Sean Fennessy is soft. This is a Jacob's Ladder situation. Andrew Scott's dead too. I don't think that, but I wanted to throw the
They're
take
all
out.
dead.
I wanted to throw the take out.
Do we ever see him look in the
Antonio,
mirror?
I cut you off. You should.
No,
You should give a real answer.
When I saw this and I read this, I was like, oh, I hate this. I hate this so much. But you know what? I will, because but then when I was reading through the quotes, I'll admit, when I was reading through the quotes, the ones that made me cry and PT cry, I thought it actually made me think, all right, like the lines are so perfect, like sort of like perfectly manicured, and a lot of these moments just feel like these sort of like perfectly manufactured writerly things. That like I understand that as a theory, like that's a credible theory, but it's one that I choose not to believe, right? Like anatomy, what was the line in Anatomy of Fall? Was something like sometimes you just have to choose like
You
what
have
you're
to
going to believe, what
decide.
you're not going to believe. Yeah, you have to decide. So I decided very early on how I was going to interpret this. Now that interpretation had to change a little bit based on the ending, which we'll talk about in a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I so I had my old MFA director. He used to like when reading novels that had like dream sequences. Dream sequences in novels are often put in like these like italics, right? Like there'd be like 5 pages in italics. And his line whenever he'd come across a passage like this with just italics was just like, oh, permission to skip, right? And I have to admit that I like in television shows, for example, like so The Sopranos and Ted Lasso. There are sometimes like almost entire episodes that are dedicated to like to dream sequences or like a
Mm-hmm.
dream whatever. And it's always my least favorite episode of a season because I rarely think that they do what they're trying to, for me, what they're trying to do, which is to express in action and in images what is going on in a character's interior often. What I love about this movie is that it takes its fantastical premise, a man getting to know his long deceased parents, and they getting to know him in turn, and
Mm-hmm.
expresses it in a way that is very much in the realm of realism. So I think that if I accept the premise that like, oh, it's none of it's real, then it just cheapens just so much
Mm.
everything. So that's when like you put in the premise, the argument, and I had to entertain it, and then I was just like, that's again, that's intellectually speaking, I get it, there's support for it, and I've decided not to believe it. What do you all think?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's both correct as in a factual sense and also the right moral thing to do. Because yeah, I think that it's intentionally left open enough that you can have that interpretation. If that is what work makes this work best for you, if for again, I don't want to belittle anyone who likes that, but like if for some reason that's like gonna make this maximize the impact of the story of like, oh my god, like it was in his head all along, all of it, then cool, like you can do that. I think that I don't think there's anything that contradicts that in the text itself. But I don't know why you would want to do that. Like I don't I don't see that perspective. That seems like so kind of just reductive of everything that we experience and that we see. And I have said again, multiple times to all of you, and I referenced it earlier. There were 2 moments during the course of the movie when I was like, "Oh, I don't know if I like this," and one of them was when I was like, "Oh, everything's a dream. Like this is stupid. Like why? Like I'm feeling it, but like I don't like that. Like this is Super Mario Brothers
Yeah.
2. Like we're just gonna find him at his typewriter at the end, and then just be like, and then the end. And I'm like, oh, okay. And
Out of
there's one other
all the
moment which we'll
things you
get
could
to.
have referenced there, you picked Super Mario.
It's what I always think of. And
Okay,
it's tough
that's
because
fair.
I teach a summer creative writing class with one of our colleagues, and we always talk about don't make your short stories to high school students. Don't make your short stories all a dream. And there's all kinds of real literary references that one could make. And in my head, it's Mario. It's this Mario with his covers up and his little hat on. That's what I think, because it was really brilliant when I was like 8 and finished Super Mario 2. But in every other instance, it's terrible. Anyway, yeah, I didn't like thinking that was the case, and sort of letting go of that and being like, oh, that's no, that isn't the point. That isn't going to be the twist. For a while I started thinking that was going to be the twist, and the movie is smart enough and makes the right choice to not definitively say that. But again, people are welcome to choose that if they want. I think that's absolutely fine. But I feel like it I don't know, in smallens, the opposite of embiggens. It in smallens all of what we see. No, I wanted to make it in embiggens though. I wanted to
I
make a
know, but
Simpsons thing. I wanted to
Shrinks
go
is
video
right
games to Simpsons when talking about All of
Oh,
Us
okay,
Strangers.
okay.
Seemed important. What do you
I
think,
feel
Jen?
like I think that so one of my favorite things about this movie is that it is a ghost story. Like that it's like ghosts are real. Like that to me was the biggest draw as I was watching it. Was like, wow, this is so interesting. And in particular, and this to me would be evidence against the it was all a dream argument, but the ghost seems sentient in a way that I feel like I have not actually seen in anything before. Um, in my at least in recent memory, where it was like 2 things. One is sort of what Antonio mentioned of like they're getting to know him just as much as he is getting to know them, and they're not spectral in the sense of like they say something ominous and then fade away, right? They're actually they function as real people. They've just sort of time traveled in some ways, right? Or they're stuck in time, right? So they think and feel like it's still 1980 whatever, right? And but they just happen to be in 2023, right? Um so that's one thing. And then the other thing is that the way that they leave the story, which is I think that the family dinner scene, oh, that's that's
Yeah.
like the roughest one of the roughest things I've ever had to sit through in terms of like just emotional devastation.
Yeah.
But the way that they kind of are the way that they start that it ends, like my quote to introduce Antonio was like, you don't get to decide how it ends, and that's setting up that scene where they're like realizing, oh, I'm not going to be in this world anymore, right? Like I'm going wherever else I go as a ghost, and that they sort of like start to lose their memories of the present, right? Because the mom and like, or they, yeah, like they die again, kind of like the mom in particular, she loses her eyesight, which was I was like, oh, that's so fascinating. That like, what an interesting take on ghosts that like enter our world and leave, right? Um, and then that they don't know how they died, right? They have to ask him, was it quick, right? And he kind of lies, right? Sort
You
of.
have
Yeah.
to.
Uh, so like all of those things, how like, giving the ghost almost like agency, but also vulnerability in a way that I just stereotypical
Mhm.
ghosts. Like if you think of like the ghosts in A Christmas Carol, right? They're the exact opposite. They're only there as sort of allegorical figures and to be
Sure.
like woo, like and then leave. Like, whereas these felt like real people. They just happened to be dead. Uh,
In
so
many
so
ways,
yeah.
this is a good double bill with Beetlejuice, another movie about ghosts as real people. Uh, Jen, I was thinking about this. Should, in case there are people who barrel through the spoiler alert but like listen to us talk without having to go see the movie, should we explain what we're talking about, like even just briefly, like what happens, that like he's talking to his parents, he gets to go and speak to the his parents at the age they were when, right before they died, but when he was, what was he, like 10 or 11 or 7, I forget the exact age. um I don't know. I just, in case there's people, they might be like, what is happening? Like, what is being
Right. If
talked
they're
about?
super, I mean, they shouldn't be here. Honestly, get out of
They
here.
shouldn't, but just like people shouldn't think it's life of the
No,
mind,
I know, I know.
everyone's allowed to, approach and do things
Right.
incorrectly.
And I guess, okay, so I'll do it by way of extending the point that I was making. So the other thing that makes this so interesting is that the way that he discovers them, right? It's not like there are no jump scares. He's not like, who's there? I heard a creaking in my old house. It's literally like he shows up, like he's visiting them and they live there. Like they're just like, hey, what's up? We're here. Like, and they're just living in their old house like they used to without much ado, right? And so this is what happens where he goes back to visit his childhood home, and then his dad is just like in the driveway, and then they kind of act like they were expecting him, right? He's like, come on in, your mom's waiting, right? Like, and they're like, oh, let's put the kettle on. Like, they're doing all these mundane things. They're not making a big deal out of the fact that, wait, you died 12 years ago. Right? And there isn't the like, there's never a conversation about like, how could you be real, or like, why are you here? You know what I mean? Which I think also very smart, because it makes it less about are they ghosts or are they not, and more about sort of like, what does it mean for them to be having these conversations at this point, and to reconcile all these things that they couldn't have before, right? Did I explain?
My response to all the good stuff that you were saying is that I think the best argument for, and I don't want to like hold on to the life of the mind thing, is that like it's like, oh well, then where is he? Like, is he just breaking into an empty home? Is it someone else's home and he's having like, he's seeing this vision? And I think that I say that because only when I read your document, the outline for the episode, Jen, I never thought of them as ghosts. Like this is the first time I'm thinking of this as ghosts. I always just thought of like, it was some weird like pocket dimension of like folded time where
Oh,
they
interesting.
got to interact with each other in through some sort of like they slipped out of reality, which in any sort of like realistic way of thinking about it isn't that different from a life of the mind thing. But I thought it was like, these are real interactions, like they are distinct, like they are themselves, the parents are the souls and thoughts and brains and minds of the parents, and not just his projection of them. But I didn't think that like he actually went to the house. I didn't think he was actually in that space. I thought that he like went to, again, some other thing, some other like souped up version. And those train rides were him like entering into another world and not actually just suburban London,
Oh, interesting.
where he was going. But I think I think that's, part of the interpretation of it. I have no problem from this point forward referring to them as ghosts. But I just never thought of them that way. I don't know what Antonio thought.
Yeah, what do you
I
think,
thought of them as
Antonio?
ghosts.
Okay.
Yeah.
I also I agree with you, PT. That also in as much as that it didn't make sense that he would be going to the house and they would just that he was just walking into that house. It seemed like he was going into something else, but and I don't know what that thing is. I think that we get a lot of surreal train stuff. So I think you're right that it's something about sort of like a passage to something else, and I'm not sure what unlocks that. Um, but and like I'm a person who again, like my stuff about dream sequences, it just applies to anything. Like I'm very much in the realm of realism, and I like realism. And so for me to suspend disbelief, to choose to just like I'm gonna just buy on that's his dead parents and they're talking, and that's fine. That just shows the level of skill, I think, of this film. That I think all stories invite us to a certain degree to sort of suspend disbelief, but some require more, like suspension of disbelief, and this one requires a lot. But the reward is so immense. I think that. So yeah, I think I thought of them as ghosts. It's maybe somewhere in between, like ghosts, but a lot of your interpretation speckled in as well, PT.
Yeah, I think in my letterbox review, I used the phrase delayed reality, that this to me did not feel impactful because it was a dream. It was because it was like this sense of what making up for what could have been, right?
Yeah.
So like all this time he's had to live without his parents and be alone. And then now it's like, oh, what would it be like to suddenly be able to pick up now, right, and know them now and get to know them now, meet them now. Like it is kind of like a weird like meet cute between him and his parents, where they're like they have to kind of awkwardly get to know each other again, and they don't recognize him, and they're like, the mom is like, you look exactly like my dad, this is freaking me out. Right? Like, so there's a sense of newness to it that makes it, to me, makes it almost impossible to actually function as a dream or a vision or something, like, you know what I mean? Because there's so many little details of like this being a new interaction, and they're meeting each other for the first time in this context. And then same thing, and this might transition us into talking about the ending.
Sure.
Same thing with the Paul Mescal's character Harry. When we find out, okay, I'll do it the right way this time, PT. So if you're still listening somehow and you don't care that we're about to spoil this huge thing in this movie at the end of this movie, I'll explain what happens first, and then
But
I will
just
make my point.
seriously, just watch the movie though. Like
Yeah.
you should go watch the
Yes,
movie.
this is your last chance. Your last chance.
You've reached the point where we've spoiled everything in the trailer, which they shouldn't have spoiled in the trailer, but whatever. Now
That's
you
true.
can leave.
I
This
don't
is
think
like
I saw the trailer.
secondary.
I
Oh,
didn't see
I
the
saw it
trailer
like
for this
I saw it
movie.
10 times. This was at the Alamo for like 3 months.
Oh,
Anyway,
okay.
yeah. Anyway, the trailer spoiled up to now, but we're really spoiling it at this
So
point.
yes, this is for reals. So the twist, the huge twist, quote unquote, at the end is that that when Adam goes to look for Harry, because presumably he has run away from seeing the ghost parents. He's like, "Oh, what is going on? I'm out of here." Right? That's what we're led to believe, right? And then Adam goes back, finds his apartment, because we've never actually during the movie been to Harry's apartment. They both live in we know that they both live in the same building, but we've always been hanging out in Adam's apartment, not in Harry's. So we go to Harry's apartment, and he figures it out because like I love this attention to detail. Planted in their first meeting is Harry's complaining about the noise of the lift, right? And then like he's like, I have white noise, like I have a white noise on to help me sleep. And so that's what he hears. Adam hears from the hallway, and he figures out that's where his apartment is. It's so good. But we find out that there's a corpse in this apartment that has probably been there for many days. And then I think this is open to interpretation, but my interpretation is that when they first meet, and Adam closes the door and is like, "You're drunk, get out of here. This is creepy. I don't understand what's happening. I'm going to close my door." That then that night, Harry dies in his apartment, either from just like overdosing, or whatever, something, because they clearly established he has substance abuse issues, right? And so like something like that happens. He dies alone in his apartment, and for the entire movie, Adam has been dating a ghost. Yes, maybe. What do we think?
I agree with that. I think it's also possible that they never talked at all. He just saw him in the window one time, and that was like I guess maybe that's my dream of the mind, is that everything with Harry was something that he created when he was like, or that he was opening the sort of portal to talk to his parents, and this other person showed up, like that Harry was already dead when they had that first conversation, because he makes the Vampires at My Door reference, which is really about the song that Adam remembers, like, and not a song that Harry remembers. So, but yeah. Either way, I don't think that there was any actual human interaction between the two of them since that time, since that initial door conversation.
But he's holding the same bottle. I feel like visually the camera tries to do so much to be like, hey, like to evoke that first night.
But he also sees him from the street because of the fire drill. And so I think he's holding the bottle then. So I think everything, maybe not the white noise thing. So maybe that is the enough evidence to throw it off. I don't know. I felt like that was possible. Yeah, but I'm not married to that theory.
What do you think, Antonio?
I thought that the first interaction, their first, like at the door, I thought that was a real, like that they had that conversation, and then the rest, I don't know what to make of the rest, right? Exactly. And so, okay, here's my thing about like, I'm so curious about your reaction to the ending, because by at that point, after he had the conversation with his family, the goodbye, like the second goodbye, right? Um, I was already a wreck, right? And so then you get to this moment, and like the movie, I don't think it cheats toward this ending. It's obvious throughout that something is sort of amiss, right? And that there's there are hints all throughout, more than hints. But there was just the same part of me that was like, I choose to believe that he was talking to his dead parents. His dead parents were talking to him, and that's real. Also chose to believe that, like, he's gonna go home and Harry's gonna be there, and they're gonna. I don't know how it's gonna work out exactly, but Adam needs a win, right? There's got to be some glimpse of like happiness and something to look forward to in his future after resolving all this fraught stuff in his past. And then this happens, which wasn't surprising so much as like, and I'm not sure if it was disappointing, um, but I was just like, I can't anymore. Like my heart's already broken. I can't break
Mm.
any more than it's already broken. So, and I think that my one, I was talking to someone else about like, I just wish he wasn't dead. They were like, well, that won't work. You can't. He has to be dead. And I was like, I guess. But I think the one,
Why? Because it's
the
too
one,
happy
yeah, I don't
otherwise?
know. I mean, I don't know. And it leads to the one sort of artistic decision at the end of the movie that I actually didn't agree with, which is that the sort of last image of them sort of like spooning, holding one another, and then as if that could sort of like make up for the rest of this, we're gonna just have this one nice image, and that will take away the fact that this is just like an
Mhm.
incredibly devastating thing on top of an incredibly devastating thing. So, um, so for me, yeah, okay, so I'm kind of glad, Jen, that it seems like you would be okay with, like, the happy ending, because I was really rooting for I was like, I need it."
And
So
they did seem to be really setting it up because I think the mom has that one line where she's like sending him off to be like, "No, you go back to that nice Harry boy and you try to make it work, right? Like because you might need to take care of each other or like you both need some help, but like you can be there for each other, right? Or something to that
yeah,
effect, right? And it's really beautiful how she says that, right?
it's so
Because
good.
thinking about her initial reaction, and I can't believe we've gone this long. It's 50 minutes and we haven't mentioned that the huge narrative in this, like the main thing that happens when he meets his parents again for the first time is that he is able to come out to them in a way
Yeah,
that he would not have when he was 12. And so uh that initial conversation with his mom, and it doesn't go the way that I think both he thinks and that the worst set up to think, right? Because the mom seems to be the more nurturing, loving character, and then she actually has a harder time with him coming out to her, right? I mean, she still it turns out okay at the end, right? But like, but she bristles the most more than the dad. The dad is kind of actually more accepting initially um, of it, which I think reverses kind of people's expectations probably. But because she's like, you can tell me, like it seems like they're closer, right? And so that's why it's a surprise. Anyway, I think the fact that she says that line sets up the story to be its resolution is like what you were saying, Antonio, that because he has resolved these issues because of this strange, crazy, supernatural happenstance of these ghosts coming back into his life and then leaving, that he's able to then move on. He was the Adam that closed the door before this, and
mhm,
then he's the Adam that can open the door after. And I feel like that made a lot of sense to me as like the arc of this movie. And then to double down on the tragedy that like, oh, that Harry's been dead the whole time. I was unhappy about it just because I wanted them to be happy, but then also I was just like, wait, but what is this for? Like what? Um, but yeah, PT, what do you think?
Well, we're hitting on the second time when I was like, I don't like this. Like, I actually think this is a bad. Like, I don't know if I was going so far as to say this is a bad movie, but I was like, this is going off the rails right now. And it was. I will admit, I didn't think the two of them were going to end up together. I thought what it was going to be
Oh,
was they were going to sort of be like, look, I'm glad we had this. Like, I am more open. I am able to be myself. The two of us aren't going to work out. Like, then like other people might move into the building, and then that's like that was going to be the image of everyone can move on. They can open their hearts to other people. When like for a couple, I don't know, a minute or two, when he goes into Adam goes into Harry's apartment and is like, "Oh, there's a smell." I thought it was that when they had gone their separate ways after, like, basically while Adam was going off to like close the book with his parents, Harry had gone and killed himself. And so I was just like, you know what? Screw you. Like, this is getting to like the Notebook level of you're just trying to like pull my heartstrings with like no real thing. So like I was actively mad. Somehow, for some reason, once it was like, oh, this is he's been dead the whole time, or since that first night, that made it better. That made it a little bit like, oh, okay. Like then it's just that like there's something to me about how whatever it was that sort of opened this portal that sort of broached these different realms of existence between Adam and his parents. Like Harry like got sucked into it, and sort of Harry was there too because he died like right when that was happening, and that like allowed them to sort of have this. So I felt like that again, to Antonio's point, like gave me the permission to be like, oh, all of that was actual interactions. They actually had those moments of love and growth and learning about themselves and each other, and all of that happened. And then I was back around to it, and then I can't put into words, and I can't put my finger now on why, but that the closing image, not necessarily the closing image of the two of them like on the bed with Andrew Scott with Adam like sort of singing the song to Harry, but the pullback into just like everyone is just stars, like basically everyone has their own sort of world. That image was, I was just sort of like, yes, brilliant, like A+, this movie's wonderful. And I don't really know, I don't remember why I felt that was like, that fully brought me back, like, and made all of this make sense. But there's just something about the cosmic nature of how it was presented and the magical realism of the whole story just made it seem like how it was just like, yeah, we are all, and again, it's all of us strangers, like all of us are just off in our own little galaxies, like doing our own thing, and we have all these things happening around us, and that's okay, like we can exist in that, and that's we can grow and learn and improve and accept within that space, even if we are very far away from technically someone else.
To me, the first I'm going to make a silly point, and then I'm going to make a more serious response to what you just said. The silly point is that to me, in that moment when they kind of like bink into like a star at the end, I was like, he's been dead the whole time too. They're all dead. They're all in heaven. And then I was like, I had to walk myself back from that. I was like, no, that can't be what it is. But that's sort of where my mind went. So I have kind of the opposite interaction where I'm like, I kind of don't. I feel like that's almost too much ambiguity at the very, very end to be like, and aren't we all stars? We're all here, like. And I'm like, no, I just really need to know like where are these people and what was happening to them, right? So part of me has that frustration, but here's my counter argument as to like why this all works, and why Harry being dead all along actually fits in with what the movie's trying to do. So one is, I go back to my idea of this delayed reality. It's not a dream, it's a delayed reality, because the way in which Adam sort of feels the same regret with his parents of like, they never got to know me, the full me, right? I never got to tell them who I really was, and now I can. This is sort of the thing of like, kind of making up for the regret of like, I was not in a place to be accepting of a relationship or to be open to, or like my heart was not open enough for someone like Harry before, but now because he's a ghost and I can now interact with ghosts, like I am able to sort of like to have that reality deferred, right? To be like, oh, okay, like I can do it now, so I'm going to do it now even though it's no longer possible. So I thought it creates a nice parallel with the parents in a way that's really interesting in terms of where he is as a person, and like and then also Adam's story of like, because they have twin coming out stories sort of, right? Like, or like their interactions with their families. That's where the title comes from, All of Us Strangers, is that because I think Harry has the line where he says, I've always felt like a stranger in my own family, right? And part of that is because of once he came out, he became sort of like, he says, like on the edges of his family, like he's not at the middle, like the heterosexual relationships in his family are with like married and kids and stuff like that. And so I think the fact that he's also a ghost at the end ties their stories together, where it's like they both were so lonely and ostracized because they were gay, that is partially, it's not just the tragedy, right, in like in Adam's case, that's driving him to be isolated and alone and closed off, but it, it's actually the fact that you have, when you're gay, you have to be a stranger to people, right? That makes it so that, someone like Harry is driven to substance abuse, and eventually that is what killed him, right? So I think there's lots of ways I can see that it all ties together, regardless of how I actually feel about the ending as an ending, if that makes sense.
I think it's important to note this was adapted from a novel, right? And I think that if you're adapting a novel, I'm a big fan of just like whatever adaptation is adaptation. You can change things, but this is probably too big.
Mm-hmm.
Would have been too. I assume that the novel ended this way, right? With Harry being dead. And my guess is that it contains additional texture that would perhaps make it more palatable to me and to Jen. um, that in that form, but and not feel like a little bit of a slap in the face at the end. As beautiful as it is, and like. I still adore this movie, even though I didn't. It was like in the same way that sort of like Past Lives was like the perfect ending. This was like not that, but it was still a movie that I heartily recommend to people, because just um, I mean, some of these scenes, I mean, you've mentioned some of them, but I think that one of the heartbreaking exchanges was when the um, the the dad was talking about how he could hear his son crying
Mm-hmm.
in his room, and so the dad, feels bad now, and he's like, "I'm sorry, I didn't come into your room," and then Andrew Scott, adult Andrew Scott, of course, would say what any adult would say, which is like, "It's fine. It was a long time ago." But he breaks when he's saying that, right? He says like, "It was a long time ago," and starts to cry, and then I started to cry because because it just sort of shows that like I love your phrase, Jen. As soon as I read it in your review, is delayed reality, right? Um, that these things, these wounds that we sometimes take as kids, like we carry them for a long
Mm-hmm.
time, and sometimes they get resolved and sometimes they don't. And part of the wonderful grace of this movie is the ability of characters to address those as fully formed adults and to have conversations that allow them to move beyond them and to grow from them, in a way that that people typically don't get to do, right? And so that's, I think, why part of the reason why I just decide I made certain decisions about how I interpret this movie, because that's the only way that it sort of like makes emotional sense to me. It's the only way that it
Yeah.
sort of makes artistic sense to me. It's the only way that the beauty of it can stay sort of preserved in my heart. So yeah.
And you alerted to this earlier when you said that the conversations are like almost too perfect, or like too,
Yeah.
but I think that that works with the themes of the movie, right? That it's like
Mm.
the the fantasy of this movie is as much the nature of the conversations that are taking place
Yeah.
as it is that they're the fact that there are dead people walking around, right? Like that's part of the fantasy, is like normally people, living people in real time, never have the types of like resolutions
Yeah.
and catharsis that a lot of these
Yeah.
characters have with each other, right? Yeah, and to be
Here's
like,
here's
"Oh,
a
I'm glad you grew up to be like a good person." You know what I mean? Like there's a
yeah.
lot of moments they're just like impossible. They're just impossible. They would never exist in real life.
When I was going through lines that I really liked in the movie, I pulled this one, and this was actually the line that as much as I loved it, as much as it broke my heart when I heard it, it actually brought me back to the theory that you started with, Jen, was that like, oh, this is all a writer's invention. And it was when the dad said to Adam, "I know I was never good at saying it. I couldn't get the words out, but I do love you very much. somehow even more now that I love you, right? It's so sort of perfect in that, like, you could imagine a writer in the situation like that the character is in,
Mhm.
imagining that this is the ideal interaction he could, like, the one thing that he could get his father to say to him, and it would make him feel whole, is something like that, and it's almost too perfect.
I have something terrible to say, and I'm glad Antonio already brought it back.
Good.
The more that we're talking about it, the more I'm like, maybe this is just something that, like, it's what he was writing the whole time. And the fact that this guy, random stranger, came to his door, he's like, I'm putting him in the story too. And like, fine, like, and that's gonna be a
Right.
thing. And all of it is a spin out from it. I think the fact that and maybe this is what I liked about it, just sort of getting this weird sort of celestial cosmic image at the end, is that it didn't explain it. It didn't say, and here's what it was. It wasn't like cut
Mhm.
to the EMTs wheeling Andrew Scott out, being like, I
Right.
wonder what he was thinking in his final moments, or whatever. Like, I think that could have been a very cheap sort of ending.
Yeah.
So I understand, I hear what you're saying. And again, I had I guess I had this like I was thinking something else was happening in the moments when he was finding Harry dead. And I was having this reaction where it was just sort of like, is the point of this whole movie that gay people can never really be happy? Is like he finally gets closure and he finally finds love, and it's like, no, that's gotta go away too. And clearly that wasn't what I didn't think that's what they were really saying, but I was getting frustrated with that. So the fact it wasn't that, and it wasn't that, like, oh, I just didn't get back in time before he made this like terrible choice, and I'm now stuck with another wave of regret and just having missed it stopping a loved one from dying, that instead it is this magical realism, delayed reality, folded reality, whatever. I was like, okay, like I made peace with it in the way that maybe Antonio's saying, which sounds a lot like we have to, like, that feels like it's giving it leeway and excusing stuff that is bad, but I don't think either of us mean it that way. It's sort of like, no, like it's this is very ambiguous, and it's very kind of again, it's just fantastical in a way that, like, we don't usually think of when we think of fantasy. And yeah, I've just thought that leaving it open ended, not having a clear closure, letting it be something that you can decide what exactly happened, and like the only thing that's real is the emotional truth of what happened between these characters. That's why what I thought was beautiful about it, and why I think it works, even if it doesn't get to the level of a past lives ending. But then again, what does?
That's a fair point. So I think, because my next question that I'm going to ask is what we have in the rhetorical situation. So I'm gonna pop us in there. All four of us, regular co-hosts on the show. So Greg's not here, so it's us plus Greg, are writing professors in varying capacities and have an academic background in writing, English literature, creative writing, all this stuff. So we like to use the rhetorical situation to sort of use our academic experiences as a lens through which to look through a film. So, in the teaching of writing or rhetoric, the rhetorical situation refers to any contextual factors that influence composing and interpretation. So that's sort of like the namesake of this segment that we like to do. The thing I thought of the most in terms of like things that I teach in my class that sort of pop up for me in this movie is this idea of genre, which I sort of said at the very beginning before we went into spoiler mode, that the genre of this is so unusual because I would call it a ghost story. But it's not a typical ghost story at all. And like we were just talking about how it's fantasy, but it's not. PT was saying fantasy, not in the way that we usually associate that genre with. So I just want to answer the general question of like, first, what genre or genres would you associate with this movie? But then also like, what do those genres afford us in terms of what this movie is trying to do? So the thing I put in here was like, so why make this about ghosts instead of just memories? Like there's a version of this movie that is like flashbacks to his childhood as opposed to him actually inhabiting his childhood as an adult. Like, I've never taken a grown man in pajamas as seriously as I do Andrew Scott. Like, it was incredible. And I'm like, oh, he's clearly in kids' pajamas, but they're adult sized, and he's about to get into bed with his parents. Like, this is, and I'm like, I'm not flinching at all. Like, it's like amazing. So like, what is that? Why does this story need to be told through that lens?
Well, as the resident person who until tonight didn't think of it as a ghost story, I will say the genre that I've been dropping it along the way, and this was in my letterbox review. I called this magical realism, and that's because it has that fantastical element. But I guess I always think of magical realism as, the realism is so important because it's like heavily rooted in a literary fiction level of humanity and emotions and character, with sprinklings of fantastical things that are happening. And so, that's to me what this story is that sort of whatever door is opened, whatever time or genre or spectral component is happening, it's happening again to sort of like give the characters a reason to interact. And it's the fact that like it's so grounded apart from this like absurd thing that we spent the first whatever it was 20 minutes of this episode trying to not say, of like, yeah, well, he's an adult and he's talking to his dead parents but when they were alive. Like that's such a high concept and unrealistic thing that it sort of in a way gives the movie permission to, like, if this were a movie about a man who has come out of the closet going back to talk to his parents that he hasn't talked to, who are 70 or whatever, it would be a little bit like, okay, like, sure, like that's fine. It's the magic, it's the magical realism of it that I think gives it such an impact.
Yeah, I think flashbacks, if it were told in a different way, if it were about flashbacks, I think you could tell that story, and it's about giving Adam peace and allowing him to move on. But part of the generosity of this movie is making the parents full-fledged characters, and it's about giving mom and dad peace too, because it like that ending, you feel for Andrew Scott, right? Because of course you feel it for Andrew Scott, because like he was a kid when he lost his parents, but his parents didn't get the opportunity to see their amazing son grow up, which as a parent, like that broke my heart too. And the fact that they were given the sort of like they were given a moment. I love that they were as we've alluded to, that they were flawed human beings and that those flaws didn't go away just because they've been dead for many years, right? That they that I feel like they moved very quickly into like an understanding mode of their son, which is good. I think. I mean, I didn't want too much of like rehashing the things that made them somewhat whatever in the 80s. but it, I don't know, like I think that very practically, to do what the film was trying to do, to be as expansively and as generous as it was to its characters, it had to be this genre that I've never seen before, that never quite, that hasn't quite existed, this intersection of so many things, as you said, Jen.
Yeah, and just doesn't have as much emotional impact, right? Because I think just the image of Adam having drinks with his parents who are still young and vibrant, and having it not be, and again, I said this earlier, but having it be a new interaction that's unfolding in real time, as opposed to, they're not he's not stepping into a memory, right? Like, this is not him as a voyeur of his past, right? It's a new present. And so it just happens to be with dead people. And like and the fact that, first of all, Claire Foy's hair, 10 out of 10, no notes.
Yeah.
Amazing 80s look. Is like, because it wasn't like a over the top perm, but it was very clearly hair from the 80s.
Will
So
note
funny.
she got a nomination for me for a letters for best supporting actress. I don't think she made it to the broadcast because we all sort of had our overlaps and then who we put forward. And I think Andrew Scott was already pipelined to
Yes.
get far, if not win, in best actor. But I did sort of single her out as and that's partially because I knew Andrew Scott had already been nominated, but I thought she was particularly incredible, and
Yeah, she was really good.
has felt a little. I know we'll get to awards watch in a second, but so she has gotten a nomination here or there, but yeah, she needs a little bit more attention for how good this was.
Yeah, and I feel like this has to be a ghost story for all the reasons that you just said, but also because there's not a way to have the in particular, because I feel like we're so enthralled with the storytelling overall that I feel like we're not honing in on the coming out story quite as much as we maybe should be. So let me try to refocus this a little bit. And I feel like the fact that it's a ghost story is necessary for telling this as a coming out story, or as a story about what it's like to be gay, right? Which, to be clear, I am not. So I'm saying that as an outsider, right? And like critiquing this movie, which has its limitations, obviously. But it seems like the perfect way to stage these conversations. And I think part of the point is like we were saying earlier, these conversations are unrealistic, and part of that is because of cultural attitudes towards gay people, right? Like they can't that conversations that seem so open and free and rich in this movie are a fantasy because they're not socially acceptable for in many places, right? So even still, like, and I like how that's baked in with the Harry character and the Adam character, because they are of kind of different generations. Like, they kind of establish through their conversations that their attitudes are different, even the language that they use, right? One uses gay, one uses queer, and then I think Adam is like queer always sounded weird. Like they have very different approaches to their own identities, um and I feel like, again, that sort of dialectic doesn't take place, and that sort of generational, like intergenerational conversation doesn't take place unless it's this movie is the way it is.
Well, I think it could, but I think that it wouldn't be as engaging. I don't know, maybe
Mm.
that's like bad to say. I have never watched Looking, so maybe I'll defer to Antonio, who is a fan of it. But I am aware enough that Looking did sort of get into a lot of gay and queer characters, like dealing with modern life and dealing with the relationship scene and the dynamics of all of that. But yeah, I feel like there's there was something to, I don't know, there was just something to having these conversations that, like, again, if it weren't if it weren't like this, they could do it, but it would feel weird to be like, so like the parents lived for the last 25 years, however long it was, from the late 80s until when this is set, which I think is like the late 2000s. And it's like, you didn't grow at all, you didn't learn anything, so that really
Mm.
helps. And that, like, is a good mirror to what's happening between Adam and Harry. But I keep wanting to call Harry Paul because it's played by Paul Mescal. It's not. I have to look every time to like confirm that I'm saying the right name. But yeah, I think that the what I thought was really intricate about the coming out component to it was the sort of confidence isn't the right word, but like Adam sort of approached it from, again, without like doing a unnecessary digging into like, and what is the reality of this conversation, but like, he was just sort of like, things are different now.
Mm-hmm.
And his mom is like, I don't like, what does that mean? Or like, how does that work? And it's
Right,
like,
because she
well, like
doesn't
everybody's a
know.
lot
Yeah.
more accepted. And she's like, oh, okay, so like you're happy and you're having good relationships. And he's like, well, no. And so like, I thought that, like, in
Yeah.
a way, that was like him coming, like sort of facing the
Mm.
fact that, he was like, oh, all this time had passed, all had moved on. He has done all of this work, or so he thought, but how trapped he was in that
Yeah.
house and in that small town, or, suburban village. And that, like, he hadn't let his heart open up as much because it had been so damaged and wounded so much by the loss of his parents, which of course had nothing to do with the fact that with his sexuality, the fact that he was gay is just an accident. But it all became so intertwined for him, and that sort of like when Harry points to his chest, or like, I think at first he says to himself, like, this all got bound up, or however that is, it's like, don't let that happen again, like that devastating. But I think that is sort of, again, like they can wrestle with the truth of all of that, and again, if it's just like people in a restaurant talking about it, it's sort of like, I don't know.
Right.
But if it's like this interesting layer of the unreal of it all, I think really makes it, I don't know, makes it sing even more.
The
Um,
line that you just referenced, I think, is the thesis of the movie. The like everything got tangled up because it's what joins the identity part of the story with the loss and grieving part of the story. You know what I mean? Like it's a nice way to be like, no, all of this is connected. We're not just telling like this character doesn't have separate storylines. Like everything is tangled up.
there's a making of film about All of Us Strangers that I watched, where Andrew Haigh, the director, revealed that the film is actually shot in his old childhood home.
Oh
Um,
wow.
yeah, so part of what appealed to him about the story was I think that some of the things about coming out in particular were things that he resonated with. I mean, he made very clear in the making of documentary that he's like, my parents are alive. They're not dead. But but I mean, there's so much texture about like that place and that's so specific to like that time of year, like the posters on the wall. And it makes
Mm-hmm.
sense now because it's like he was recreating his own, like this is his literally the director's like childhood bedroom, right? This is literally the living room where he had, like so I thought that part of it just made me appreciate the film even more, and it made sense that it felt so like specific and so lived in, which I think was
I didn't.
important at the realism part of the magical
Yeah.
realism. Go on. Yeah, sorry, Jen.
Yeah, I was gonna say I would include the music in that as well because I think
Yeah,
the one behind the scenes thing I had heard was that his Andrew Haig's favorite song is the one that's at the end, the vampires at your door, right? Which the
Mhm.
name PT probably would know this, like the name. I don't remember the title of the song. It's terrible.
I
Um.
should know. It's The Power of Love by Frankie
Oh,
Goes to
okay, there we
Hollywood.
go.
Because it was, I have to admit that I only vaguely knew that song. I never knew the title. I didn't know there was a third Power of Love song after Huey Lewis and the News and Celine Dion. But now we have the full trifecta, and the power we possess.
But yeah, like they do such a good job of transporting us back to sort of like how vulnerable we are as teenagers, right? Because it's
yeah,
like a lot of teenagers process what's going on or their emotions like through something like music or like
yeah,
or yeah like and then there's also like I feel like the initial conversation between Paul, sorry, see now I did it between Harry and Adam. Thanks a lot.
Sorry.
That big conversation between Harry and Adam where they're kind of sharing their stories, coming out stories, right? Or like what their relationship with their families are and stuff like that. That they talk about the word like Harry says, "I don't like the word gay because everybody called everything gay when we were kids. Like your backpack is gay." You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
the way he contextualizes it from in his childhood, I feel like is very powerful.
Mhm.
Um, and like we
Yeah,
keep
and that
kind of having
is.
moments about that, like moments like that throughout the movie of like it all, like returning to the site of your childhood.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm only realizing this sort of like you were saying, this sort of almost micro generational. I guess maybe that's over or underselling the age difference between Harry and Adam. But Adam is like, oh, queer always sounded like an insult. Like
Hmm.
gay seemed like it was at least somewhat respectable. And Harry feels the opposite of gay. So gay was the thing that everything means bad, and queer is like it's got the sexual stuff taken out of it. It feels more respectable. Can I just say, pertinent to some of the discussions that we've had and points that both of you have made, I did. This is the kind of deep research I want to bring to this, which is while you were both talking, I clicked on the Wikipedia link for the novel, and the plot summary for the novel is very short. May I read it to you?
Sure.
So you can see what the novel story is. The narrator, Hideo Harada, a 47-year-old TV scriptwriter, meets a couple who bear an eerie resemblance to his dead parents and forms a friendship with them, visiting them often. As his health declines, he comes to realize that they are ghosts who are sapping his life force.
What?
Oh my.
What? Not the movie. That's not the movie we watched.
That's
I
not
don't
true.
think
or
it
is
has
it?
the ending you were looking for, Antonio, that
No,
gave more
well, someone should have
nuance.
let Harry live. Harry should have lived then. Never mind. Never
Let Harry
mind.
live.
Wow, that's taking it to like, talking about genre. That's taking it to like fable territory. You're like, you know what I mean? Like that's some monkey's paw stuff right there.
Yeah.
I'm now more than I am mad that Andrew Scott wasn't nominated. I'm now more mad that there wasn't a Best Adapted Screenplay
I
nomination, because
know.
that's a crazy adaptation.
So I had heard that the adaptation was pretty drastic. So the biggest champion of this movie is actually Eric Anderson on Awards Watch. He's always the one sort of advocating for this movie and why is it not getting nominated and all that stuff. And I think it was from him that I had heard that so much of this is completely overhauled to make it more about a coming out story in a way that's really important and kind of important for the LGBTQ community and stuff like that. And that it should be a feat of adaptation because like none of that stuff is in the original novel.
I mean,
So
Wikipedia is never wrong, so I assume that is correct.
Now I'm trying to think, like, is that theoretically possible in this movie that's what's happening? I don't think it is.
No,
But
he does. They do reference that he has a fever many times in the movie, or that he feels warm.
But that's
so,
because
like,
this is he's dying. That's because he's dying, and this is a Jacob's Ladder situation.
But that also that supports the it's all a dream, right? A fever dream.
Right. Yeah,
I shouldn't be bringing that up.
No, but full credit to both of you. They're ghosts, according to the book. They are ghosts. So
there you go.
So there, you win some, you lose some when you look at the book, and you win on the ghost category.
But I would not have predicted that last part, the life force sucking. Like that's
also sounds kind of good. Like now I want to read the book.
Yeah, PT's like, I want the pure. He's like, I want the pure horror version of this movie. Let's go.
Yeah. With the same cast, for the record.
And then it's like a double feature.
Oh my God, yes.
Take that, Grave of the Fireflies and Totoro. Okay, so I think we could do Oscars watch, but not really Oscars watch because this is not nominated for any Oscars.
Oscars lament.
Yes, yeah. Oscars lament. So, I mean, how do you want to do this? Do you want to do some Oscar fairy where we boot out some people so that this can get some nominations?
Ooh.
Do you want to just say
yes,
like what you would?
I definitely want to do that. But before that, I do that. I want to ask you something, Jen, because ever since the Letter Awards, I felt kind of bad that I was so adamant about Andrew Scott for Best Actor, and you hadn't even seen the movie. So do you feel? So I'm curious now that you've seen it. Are you okay?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm fine with it. Yeah,
okay.
I was like, I get it. It took not 15 minutes for me to be like, oh, I totally understand why we're doing this but I also at the same time kind of understand why his performance didn't end up getting nominated for an Oscar because it's not quite loud enough. Especially and Oscar voters notorious for not watching movies or not watching all of the movies or right. The movies to completion. And I feel like unless you make it to that diner scene, there's no Oscar reel, right? It's the performance is kind of too quiet, too subtle. Sort of like Greta Lee, right? Like I think it's a similar lack of flashiness that I think is making the performance suffer in the awards.
If you think about the fact that Oscar voters get screeners and they can log on to a website. Maybe some of the older ones still get discs or VHSs. I don't know. And that they it's frequently sort of just like they may only watch 10 minutes and be like, yeah, I get it, and then move away. It makes a lot of sense that, all due respect to these performers, both Bradley Cooper and Coleman Domingo got nominated for very brassy, showy performances that would get you excited right away to be kind of like, ooh, this person's really, they're doing it, they're bringing it here, let's watch this movie and see what's happening. Whereas this movie, again, quiet, slow, and small, in a way that I think is good, but I could very easily see it just be like, yeah, he's doing his thing, whatever, and folks not watching it, which is unfortunate because I would, if we are going to move into Oscar fairy, I would bounce out either one of those. I would lean towards Bradley Cooper. We have not and may never will get to a Maestro episode. But all due respect, I think he's an excellent performer. I think he's doing a lot of work, and it's good work in that movie, and in his performance and his acting in Maestro. But it doesn't hold a candle to this. And Coleman Domingo is an excellent performer who's doing a lot of fun work in Rustin. But that movie is not particularly good, and there's he's elevating it, but he cannot elevate it that much. And whereas this movie and Andrew Scott's performance are just spiraling together up into the heavens, literally in the end.
I would probably. Yeah, those are good picks. I would probably lean more towards Coleman Domingo just because I need us to put Bradley Cooper out of his misery. So I still need him to at least be nominated and have a shot at getting an Oscar, which he's probably not going to. So, but yeah, it's tough. It's tough, right? But I love Coleman Domingo in general. So that's hard. That's hard for me to say as well.
Especially what does Bradley Cooper have? 8, even before this year, he had 7 or 8 nominations. Yeah, Coleman Domingo. I'd rather he get a nomination and he can be Academy Award nominated than in all future trailers when he's introduced. Then though I agree, I want Bradley Cooper to win an award just so he can relax and just
can enjoy life.
Just be happy, be a peaceful man.
Antonio, who are you swapping out?
I would swap out one of those two. Those are exactly who I'd have: Coleman Domingo or Bradley Cooper for Andrew Scott. And then for supporting actor, I'd boot out Robert De Niro or Sterling K. Brown or Robert Downey Jr. To be perfectly honest, for Paul Mescal and Jamie Bell. I know, I'm coming for you, Oppenheimer. Emily Blunt for Claire Foy.
Oh my gosh!
And I'm taking out Oppenheimer for All of Us Strangers in Screenplay. I'm a madman. I did take out Maestro in picture for all of us.
I've been really good about your anti-Oppenheimer takes. I'm reaching my limit right now.
I know. No, fair enough. No, fair enough. Go ahead.
I will say, I'm happy with the Best Supporting Actor and the way it turned out. As the show's number one, Robert De Niro should be nominated. I would be okay. I would strongly consider replacing him.
He's gotten enough.
Either Paul Mescal or Jamie Bell, probably Paul Mescal, because he's much more important to the movie. But
he'd be bordering category fraud in supporting to me. I think I know that realistically that's where he would end up if he got nominated. But I say he's I don't know. He's really close to being a co-lead with Andrew Scott.
Yeah. Now, given that I have not seen The Color Purple, so I don't want to boot out Danielle Brooks. Similar to Coleman Domingo, it's Danielle Brooks is Oscar nominated. That's wonderful. I don't know I don't know the performance. I would probably also choose Emily Blunt in Oppenheimer, who I love and had a great time, but was such a small role. And I don't know. Let's give it to Claire Foy. I'm fine with it. I am not on board with getting rid of Oppenheimer and adapted screenplay. I think that's going too far.
I might get rid of Jodie Foster. As much as I love her, that's
fine,
and she's good. She's really good in Naiad. But come on, if you're gonna make the argument that Coleman Domingo, because Rustin's not that good, shouldn't be there, I think you can make the same argument for Jodie.
Yeah, that's fair. I agree. And again, my inclination hopefully there'll be more Oscar Fairy content coming here at the Long Take Review, and I will say that yes. Spreading the wealth is coming to my Oscar Fairy movements as well. And so, yes, Jodie Foster's perfectly fine with her Academy Award accomplishments. So maybe, yes, Emily Blunt can stay in. So it's good for you, Emily Blunt. Sorry, Jodie Foster. I do think you did a great job in Naiad, but let's get Claire Foy in. I hate to do it. I think, and Greg will be mad, but I think I would get rid of American Fiction and adapted screenplay.
What?
For All of Us Strangers. I know, but what? What are we getting rid of?
I mean, the category's packed. It's true. Wait,
the category's packed.
It's Oppenheimer,
Barbie, Poor Things, and The Zone of Interest.
And
to me, Oppenheimer and Zone of Interest have to be there. Like, that's my take on the screenplays. Antonio's free to disagree. I'm fine with that. Poor Things. I again, like, this is why Greg would be mad, because he likes American Fiction and is pretty off on Poor Things. I think Poor Things is a great adaptation. I think there's a lot of changes, and they really did add things. From what little I know about the novel, God forbid if Barbie gets taken out. I mean,
Well, I mean, yes.
we
Barring the discourse that would ensue, right? Like,
yeah,
it's hard to separate those two things.
it
But
is.
I could take American Fiction out too. I could see
So,
that.
and like, I love American Fiction, and I love that
Yeah.
screenplay. You know, it's possible that I could be talked into, not taking anything out, but I think right now, like, I would rather leave the supporting categories in place and put the screenplay in, which is, American Fiction is protected in supporting actor, but then is hurt in screenplay. I don't know. What about you, Jen?
I'm going to bring in another category. I feel like I would have given this a sound nomination. Sound is so important in this movie because there's so much quiet, and which is why I probably wouldn't get nominated. But but just everything from because especially when they're in the apartment building, there's a lot of humming and kind of ambient noise. Right, there's the white noise from that Harry talks about, and then all of a sudden it stops. And I feel like the rhythms of that are so important to establishing kind of the mood of the movie overall. Yeah, and just like, yeah, so that would be my weird, like, oh, it could have been nominated there.
I have good news for you, Jen. You know what movie's nominated in that category that you can replace? It's Maestro. You can just kick Maestro out. We get it. There's symphonic music. The Creator, Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1, Oppenheimer, and The Zone of Interest are the other nominees. Right.
Okay.
So I'm with you. I like that idea. Not just because I want to kick Maestro out of nominations, but I would prefer that. That would absolutely never happen in the actual process. But if we have the wand
we're
out,
already here.
We're making changes.
Yeah.
Why not?
I like it.
Anything else, Antonio, you'd want to change?
I think that's it. I've done enough violence to Oppenheimer, and like Oppenheimer's fine, right? Like it's gonna steamroll, probably steamroll with the BAFTAs too, which we can start talking about that, because this is where this movie has a chance to win some awards. It did, I think even though Andrew Scott bafflingly was left off of the BAFTA ballot, it still performed pretty well. It still got a lot of nominations. More than I think people were expecting, given the precursors. So,
why do you think Andrew Scott missed? Like, that's just
really
mind-boggling. Because it's not like they didn't like the movie,
right?
Like you just said. So, what's the beef?
It's also crazy,
and BAFTA even has like a jury save system, right? Where
right.
they can if someone doesn't get the votes, they can still keep them in. And so, like, I just really don't understand how this happened.
There's also 6 nominees. So like, it just means like, it's like less of an excuse. The only way that it makes sense to me is literally everybody being like, of course he's getting in. Like, I don't need to vote for him. And then, well, I mean, or it being like, I was gonna say it could be that no one watched it, but if it got all nominated in all these other categories. So just because I'm looking at it, actor leading role in the BAFTAs: Bradley Cooper, Maestro; Coleman Domingo, Rustin; Paul Giamatti, The Holdovers; Barry Keoghan for Saltburn; Cillian Murphy for Oppenheimer; Teo Yu for Past Lives; common BAFTA W.
Oh, it's hard to argue with that one,
nomination.
Yeah,
all love to Barry. Although I was getting a little worried for a little while about his accent on Masters of the Air, but that's another conversation. That's for long TV review. His accent work in Masters of the Air is out of control. I was starting to be like, are we sure he's a good actor? Like, what's happening? But no, I don't really believe that. And he's, he really gave his all in many ways in Saltburn, but you can't do that. You can't do that over Andrew Scott in this movie.
I agree.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But do we think it will win any of its BAFTAs? So it's up for casting, supporting actor, supporting actor for Paul Mescal, supporting actress, and directing. Yeah, directing.
Yeah, it doesn't. Oh, it's also up for outstanding British film. I think it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, but that's up
Not
against Poor Things and Zone of Interest, so that
right.
might
Poor
be
Things
tough.
is probably winning that.
I think it's Poor Things. Yeah.
Because I think Oppenheimer takes best film. Poor Things takes best British film, and everyone is like, "Yep, we did it."
Yeah.
Uh,
Right. We
Or
split
just
it
maybe
right down the middle.
casting,
But
this thing that I've never thought of before.
right.
oh,
I mean,
right, yeah.
and it could be an interesting window into what could happen because it's Oppenheimer's not nominated there. So, that
Oh,
can't be an Oppenheimer role. It's All of Us Strangers, Anatomy of a Fall, The Holdovers, How to Have Sex, a movie that just came out in America, and Killers of the Flower Moon. So
that's actually
that
not bad.
could be where it gets like, oh, we couldn't vote for Andrew Scott, but we'll vote for the person who cast Andrew Scott. Like maybe that's where it is. And I actually feel like it's like not I wouldn't be totally surprised if it won outstanding British film just because there was such a dust up that he wasn't nominated and it didn't get any
Right.
Oscar nominations. I don't think it's likely, but I wouldn't be shocked. I think you're right. I think Poor Things is the heavy favorite.
What's Claire Foy's competition in supporting actress?
Great question. It is Emily Blunt in Oppenheimer, Danielle Brooks in The Color Purple, Sandra Hüller in The Zone of Interest, Rosamund
Oh,
Pike in Saltburn, and Davine Joy Randolph in The Holdovers, who
oh,
I've just gotten word has already won. They've already given it to her. They just emailed me and said Davine Joy Randolph's already won. No, I don't know, but she's won every other award, so I assume she's won.
and I did hear this morning. This is terrible. I can never remember what I listened to too many podcasts. I don't know which one it was. Possibly Little Go Men or Awards Watch. Those are the ones I watched the most, listened to the most recently. But they said she won the London Critics Awards too. So like it's over. Like that. We even now know British people like her. So
yeah. And since we're here, let's do it. Best actor in a supporting role. Antonio's friend Robert De Niro in Killers of the Flower Moon. Antonio's other friend Robert Downey Jr. in Oppenheimer. Jacob Elordi for Saltburn. Saltburn outkicking its coverage here in the BAFTAs. Ryan Gosling in Barbie. Paul Mescal, All of Us Strangers, and Dominic Sessa for The Holdovers.
So it's not like they weren't paying attention. You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
Teo Yu and Dominic Sessa, to me, those are good picks. Like, those are good picks to be like, oh, like you were thinking carefully about this, right? So it's just weird that there's such big holes. Anyway, but yeah, so who takes that? I guess
I think
Robert
it's
Downey Jr.
Robert Downey Jr., right? I think this is the issue is like the BAFTAs used to be fun and weird, and I think now they want to be like, we want to predict what the Oscar's going to be.
Last year, Banshees of Inisherin won a ton of BAFTAs, right?
Right. So
That's
I think
true.
the predicting move of like when you can pick a British film over a not British film to win, do that. I think that's still true, largely.
Yeah.
But I think the problem is that Oppenheimer, the big juggernaut, is also a British film. So it's like that's kind of overshadowing something like a Banshees of Inisherin, which honestly I feel like All of Us Strangers sort of is like a Banshees of Inisherin in terms of like sort of the type of movie, you know what I mean? Like the size of the scope of the movie, kind of.
Theatrical, yeah.
Well, I also want to. I'm looking at the record now. Best film and best director were All Quiet on the Western Front. Banshees won both supporting actor and actress for Barry Keoghan and Kerry Condon. Kate Blanchett won for Tar. Austin Butler won for Elvis. Original screenplay, Banshees over Everything Everywhere. Adapted screenplay, All Quiet on the Western Front. So just whiffs across the board.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that felt like the BAFTA people just didn't connect with Everything Everywhere in a way that a lot of organizations in America did.
Well, that's my point. Is like it was the front runner by then, and everyone was like, "What does this mean?" And the other half of the people were like, "Calm down. It's just British people being British." So. So it is, and something like Killers of the Flower Moon underperformed at BAFTA. That's also, you can kind of explain that as like it's a very American story and is not going to appeal to a more British or a European audience as much. And so, again, I think it's more complicated this year because the big juggernaut, the front runner, is Oppenheimer, which is also British, and so we don't have the elimination process as clearly as we would have in past years with like an American film competing in that top spot. So. I don't know. We'll see. Wait, so is it winning anything? I think we just decided it's not winning anything except maybe casting.
Casting. It might win
Okay.
casting.
I mean,
It might win casting.
Paul Mescal. I could see Paul Mescal maybe.
Right.
Maybe. I saw something saying that like maybe Jacob Elordi, and I was like, please.
Well, I feel
no.
like the Saltburn, it depends on, like, I think the
Yeah.
Saltburn love has kind of faded a little bit, or at least is not as fervent as it was when these nominations came out. So, yeah, it's hard to say, but I don't know. And Jacob Elordi is also nominated in Rising Star. So if he's going to win anywhere, I
Yeah.
feel like it's probably there. But
Yeah,
Yeah,
that would
fine.
make sense.
Yeah.
Although,
So-
shout out to Ayo Edebiri for also being nominated for the Rising
Yeah.
Star Award.
yeah, Rising Star, a category the Oscars should have. Not that I want Oscars and BAFTA to have all the same categories, but that's a good one.
I do feel like the Oscars Rising Star category would be like the Grammys Best New Artist, where it'll be like this person you've heard of for a decade, but the Grammys only just discovered them. And you'll be like, oh, sure, they're on their 5th album, but that's fine. So I'm curious how the Oscars would work it out, but I feel like they would screw it up somehow, or at least it would take a while for them to land on a formula that worked.
Who are you putting in Oscars Rising Star? Like, if with the American, not as British leaning version of this category?
That's a great question. I
Charles
mean,
Melton,
Dominic Sessa.
Dominic Sessa, yeah.
yeah, Dominic Sessa, Charles Melton. I mean, I do love Ayo Edebiri as a choice there.
Yep.
Milo,
Yeah, I mean,
gotta get an anatomy in there.
Milo and yeah,
Messi.
everyone wins. Everyone wins that way. Yes,
So we sneak Messi in there.
Messi, exactly.
More Snoop content. More Snoop content.
Yeah. I mean, again, and this would be I'm now backtracking. I'm folding in on myself as part of the problem, but like, I guess I don't know what maybe Teo Yu has done like 20 movies in Korea, and that would be almost insulting to say that he's a rising star, but like
but that would be a very
viable.
Oscars move. Yeah. All right. Nice. So, sorry to all of us strangers. We wish you could win more awards. It's sort of the takeaway here from this conversation.
All of us strangers, none of our awards.
Yes. Oh, there we go. Thank you both. I'm so glad we got to talk through this movie. I feel like we talked through a lot. There were a lot of theories flying around, but I think we got a good handle on it. PT, if folks want to follow the show, or if they want to share their theories and their thoughts about whether or not all these characters are ghosts, is everybody in this movie dead? Where can they do that?
Well, they can, as mentioned earlier, they should please subscribe to the show, follow us, rate us, review us. Hey, why not? Wherever you get your podcast. You can comment on the Substack where Jen will be hosting this and posting it, thelongtake.substack.com. You can come and comment on our Instagram and Threads pages at The Long Take Review. You can send us an email, thelongtakereview@gmail.com. You can also find us each individually on Letterboxd. My Letterboxd is PT McNiff, PTMCNIFF. I did review this movie. I think all three of us did. So you can find our reviews, the review of the person that you either agreed with the most or disagreed with the most, and add a comment. And I think we'll all end up seeing it because we're all creepy stalkers who look at each other's pages.
My Letterboxd is A Elefano, AELEFANO.
I was gonna make a joke that we're all ghosts on Letterboxd.
Yes.
You can come be haunted by us. You can find me on Letterboxd, real or dead, at Qui-Gon Jen. And that made no sense. That's how you know I'm tired. And also, we're trying to tag our reviews with LTR Pod. So that's the other way that you can find our reviews. Antonio, we were wondering if you were actually doing that. There was a question about
I'm not doing that. I will do that now.
Okay,
I'm so sorry.
Okay. You can go back and
LTR
edit.
Pod.
So yeah, LTR Pod. And you can also, because we want to start establishing a community and getting to know what our movie listeners like to watch. So you can tag your reviews with LTR Pod too, and then so we can take a look and see. All right, and you can also find me on Instagram and Threads at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel. Welcome to The Long Take Review, a film podcast. God, this is not a good way to start. Not a good way to start, everybody.
No, it's perfect. It's
I'm just gonna
perfect.
completely start over. I did this the other day too. I tripped over a bunch of words. I don't know why. Welcome. No,
That's
what's
good.
going
We
on?
need an outtake. We need outtake reels.
Yeah,
That's true.
you can put this at the end. This
At
is
the
the,
end,
this is
yeah,
the
for the
little
bloopers.
for all
This is
those
my
people
blooper
who
reel.
listen to 2.5 hours about all of us.
For Hasib and Greg. That's
Thank you for listening.
okay.